Smitashree, thank you so much for coming on to Startup Steroid today. I'm really excited to do this interview because you're really working on a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and that's diversity in the workplace and obviously in the executive ranks and in the boardroom. So this is going to be a really interesting topic. But before we get into the actual company, let's start with a quick introduction. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Dhaval. As you said, my name is Smitashree Menon, founder and CEO of theboardiQ, which is a startup at an early stage, which is on a mission to create inclusive boards for businesses. A quick introduction about my strengths, which really lie at the intersectionality of inclusion, technology, sustainability, and transformation, with more than 2 decades of experience working close to a decade with Motorola, Motorola in all its avatars, whether it was Motorola Inc., Motorola Google, Motorola Lenovo. I also happen to serve on their India legal entity boards. And prior to Motorola, I was also with MetLife, which is one of the largest life insurance companies in the world. And before that, with Sun Microsystems. And how I describe my experience with Sun was the Google of its time, the experience that I had with that company. And then before that with IBM. So pretty much a technology background is what I bring to the table. And really excited, first-time entrepreneur with theboardiQ. So really excited to really lend my strengths in building a platform which enables underrepresented minorities and all slates of inclusion to get into positions of power on boards as well as executive roles. So thanks for the opportunity, Dhaval.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it seems like, all throughout your career, you've had sort of high-level positions with a lot of the tech companies. So I think that, that's obviously the topic today. So tell me a little bit about sort of what you were doing in recruiting just before you started theboardiQ and what that experience is like, because that's obviously on the other side of the table, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's very opportune right now, given the state that we are in all across the globe in terms of, if you look at the United Nations sustainability goals, you look at the World Economic Forum, every metric that you're tracking on as to how you're kind of raising the bar or raising the needle in terms of equality and really fighting for equal rights for all aspects of inclusion, including gender, LGBTQ+. And so the idea really festered, I would say, a couple of years ago when I was here in the Valley doing executive recruiting. And one of the clients and because of my passion for inclusion with my career, every assignment that I would do in the exec search space, I would do a conscious outreach in terms of all aspects, in terms of, like I was mentioning, underrepresented minorities, people of color, race, ethnicity. So I did a lot of work for The Gap, which is one of the largest apparel brands headquartered out of San Francisco. And that's when I started realizing, there were 2 problems. One is when I was pretty successful in onboarding a few leadership hires that were inclusive in nature. But as I was doing those assignments, it just made me realize that the number of underrepresented minorities or gender candidates were so few, I could really literally count them at the back of my fingers. That's how few there were.
Wow.
And even the ones that were there, they were so reticent to really talk about their abilities. They were brilliant technically, but really kind of showcase their ability and really kind of landing the right platform to talk through their whole ability, I think, and to make the last mile selection. I think there was a little gap there. And so that's when I started thinking that how do we harness technology to really, reduce the unconscious and algorithmic bias. I wouldn't say eliminate because science is still not 100% proven, but really kind of use technology to at least create a platform that is compelling in reducing the bias and getting more of inclusion candidates onto positions of power. And it's great timing, as I was mentioning, because whether it's legislation in California with Senate Bill 826, which requires mandatory representation on boards. They have an Assembly Bill 979, which requires, apart from gender, you would need to have additional slates of inclusion on boards. And there's a lot of corporate activism, whether it's Goldman Sachs, BlackRock, all of them, saying that they will not take any company public unless they do have inclusion on their boards.
Right.
There's 9 other states in the US that require some form of reporting, mandatory reporting in terms of inclusion on boards. So timing wise, I thought, that's the best, based out of my experience in executive recruiting. It kind of lended itself into this idea of the theboardiQ. And I was very fortunate that one of my last hires was for a Goldman Sachs investee company, where, because again of my conscious outreach, I was able to onboard a person of Latino origin onto the CTO role. And his way of giving back to me was coming up with the name theboardiQ. And he actually, because he's technical, he made sure that the domain was available, and he did his little homework there. And he said, theboardiQ, because I see the passion in you, and the IQ really stands for inclusion as well as intelligent boards, because how do you enable boards to be more effective with quick decision making? I think so. That's how. That's a little story as to how the theboardiQ idea started, festering, and we're at an early stage right now with the company.
Fantastic. Yeah, I really do love the name because I love that, IQs can stand for both the intelligence as well as inclusion. So that's fantastic. So what is, you touched on this a little bit, but let's get into the company really. What is the grand vision that we're trying to achieve? Inclusion is one piece of it, but how do we achieve that?
Absolutely. So our moonshot is to, really enable, sorry about that, is to enable the creation of inclusive boards for businesses. And so our value proposition, if you were to look at Dhaval, is to really tap into a 25 billion market opportunity in terms of really enabling public and private boards to be compliant with required legislation. So there is a compliance angle in terms of the platform. And we are also, like I was mentioning, a big differentiator of our platform is to really reduce the unconscious and algorithmic bias in the entire search, discovery, match, selection, and onboarding of executive talent for board roles. And moreover, we would create stickiness in the platform by enabling intelligent, actionable insights. So again, if you were to look at an acronym which summarizes the value proposition, so you look at 6 R's is what I call it. So the first R stands for regulation. So how do we make boards, both private and public, be aware contextually? It's like real time, anytime, any place, any device in terms of regulation requirements. The second is in terms of reducing unconscious and algorithmic bias. So that's the second value proposition. The third R stands for we have a very strong recommendation engine. And the platform in its final avatar would really kind of have a proprietary software which recommends the best fit candidates, inclusive slates. So really understanding and creating a recommendation score. It's called the theboardiQ Composite Score, which ranks candidates based on their skills, knowledge, experience for a particular board vacancy. So really recommendation is again a big part of our story. And then the fourth R is reducing costs as well as hiring cycle times. So the value proposition is a subscription-based model where we would reduce costs by half and hiring cycle times by close to 75% with our one-click features, open APIs, easily integratable platform with existing software, enterprise software systems. And then the fifth R is basically in terms of you often hear pipeline is an issue. So reduction in pipeline. So we are creating a contextual board readiness path, which understands, for example, what a Dhaval brings to the table versus what a Smita has, and recommends a board readiness path. If you remember my story, we would have brilliant candidates, but they would not be board ready, or they would not be ready to take on the responsibility. So the platform really harnesses, again, your knowledge graph and creates an algorithm which is no longer one size fits all. So it recommends a personalized, based on your budget. It recommends what you can really pursue and get yourself set up for success. So that's the fifth R. And this last sixth R is of course in terms of really kind of creating reputation. So corporate reputation through intelligent analytics. So the stickiness of the platform is to really making information available. So you, whether it's ethics, compliance, all of the harassment issues that you keep reading about. How do you make boards aware so that it protects your corporate reputation in a sense? So this is basically in a nutshell what the board IQ is about in terms of the 6 R's that we stand for in terms of a value
Fantastic.
proposition. Yeah.
Those things, I should highlight that those things are so important because of the changing regulation, to changing skill sets, even amongst the board members. And obviously, judging, these things are not easy to do for any company. So to wrap everything up on one platform, I think is extremely important and very unique, I think. So kudos to that. Great job. Now, I know you're still at an early stage, but tell us sort of how you're sort of envisioning development of this platform, and what sort of the next steps are for you to go forward.
Yeah. So we are at the stage of raising our first round of funds. So we are at the fundraising stage. But again, very grateful that I have a very strong technical advisory board. So basically, the 2 Sun alumni, from that have kind of lended themselves in terms of the technical brilliance that they bring to the table. One of them is Shantanu Gudihal. He is a senior product manager at Microsoft. And his earlier background was, he sold his company to Pega Systems. It was called Mesh Labs, and he has authored AI playbooks, which have resulted in greater than $100 million in terms of revenue. So he's one of the technical advisors. So, and the second gentleman called Bharat Mundlapudi, he is also, he's one of the original source code software engineers at Hadoop that source coded Hadoop at Yahoo. So
oh, wow.
Both of them have really, with me have kind of, because I only have functional information and knowledge. And of course, I've always worked with tech teams, but really being able to blueprint our vision in terms of how the platform is going to look like. And the first and foremost, what we realized, and that's something that we are bootstrapping any which way, is through my own effort, is to really create the core data. It all begins with creating core data. And believe me, Dhaval, this is going to be such an important task because it doesn't exist. So there is a lot of unstructured data. So if you look at the proxy statements, which is the 14A definitive proxy statements from which we would derive most of the board composition, at least for the public boards, every proxy statement has a different format. And it doesn't even report out some of the core aspects that we are looking at in terms of ethnicity, race, or any of that. And there are a few enlightened boards, I would call it, that do it. I think 70 to 80% of the boards are still very traditional in their approach. And so I see a huge opportunity for the board IQ to create this proprietary data to begin with, really harnessing the Russell 3000 boards. And once you have the data and have it accurate and have it audited, really putting that as the backbone of the platform is going to be very important. And we're going to be using a strategy of build by partner. So not all of it is going to be built by the board IQ. There's some core elements that we will be building on the platform. We will be buying solutions from the market. For example, we would be leveraging what's called an inclusive board vacancy. So the language in which you write a board vacancy also, it's been proven, it could easily be skewed. So how do we make it more amenable to women candidates to apply, or underrepresented minorities to apply? So there are solutions in the market which do NLP-based contextualizing of board vacancies so that you eliminate or reduce the chances of bias, even in terms of how you write a board vacancy. So that's the buy element. So you build, you buy, and then you partner. So we are looking at a partnership strategy. We're evaluating vendors that can really stitch this whole architecture together from the first mile to the last mile in terms of how the platform is going to look like. And we've been engaging with vendors, getting proposals. So as soon as we get the funding, it'll be go in terms of execution. So that's the vision that we have right now. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Fantastic. I mean, this is such a fascinating field. So once you start to develop these profiles for the board members, how will that work for the new board members? Someone who hasn't been a board member, who might be a junior executive rising up through the ranks now. How do you start to develop these profiles for someone new like that?
Yeah, and it's very timely you asked that question, Dhaval, because today, just today, I've created a little franchisee called the boardiQ Hall of Fame, which was again a shot in the dark. And it started with a little story where during my executive search, I would do a Google search on the top Asian Americans in the US, and it took me to a wiki page.
Right.
And the wiki page had all outdated names, it had outdated positions. And I said, man, there's so many accomplished Asian Americans, and why is there not a list that really talks about their accomplishments to corporate America? And so I created the boardiQ Hall of Fame, and at zero cost. It was only effort, and it just kind of paid off because we had close to about 24 corporates endorsing the boardiQ,
Oh, wow.
taking out corporate communications. Really, it kind of elevated the standing of the boardiQ because we were relatively unknown as a brand.
Right.
And so by way of lending themselves to our name, and these were CEOs of very well established companies, and they were sitting on boards. Say, for example, Roger Ferguson, who is the CEO of TIA, and he sits on the board of Alphabet, or
Mm.
Stacey Brown Philpott, who runs this SoftBank Opportunity Fund. All of them, gave so much of honor, and they shared their credentials with the boardiQ. So I was like really touched that even with a small effort, I got so much of traction. So this morning, I did that with the Asian American emerging leaders. So these are the next generation of leaders. And these are again 100. I do have my counterpart, Rupa, who does this research for me. But really, we looked at sustainability, because if you look at one of the important factors that are coming into play for the next generation board leaders, it's all going to be about sustainability goals.
Right.
Whether it's, if you look at World Economic Forum, so they've come up with what's called the 4 Ps. So it talks about
Mhm.
people. So people, in terms of gender equality, pay equity, and all of those aspects. Then it talks about planet. So what are companies doing in terms of, zero emission
I
goals
mean,
by 2040 to 2050. I think most corporates are focusing on that. Prosperity, financial inclusion. I think that's a big part of every corporate story right now. And then the 4th P is the principles of governance. So very strong ethics and compliance and governance model. So how do we make the next generation of board ready leaders conversant with these core metrics, and have their variable compensation, whether it's, MasterCard has taken one of it's one of the best corporate examples in this case, where they've tied in all of the board members short-term bonus plans as well as the long-term equity programs to how they kind of contribute. Each of the board members is tracked on metrics related to the WEF goals. So how do we make the next generation of board readers conversant with some of these newer metrics is going to be key. And so I've kind of the boardiQ Hall of Fame emerging leaders. Bulk of the honorees would be people that are in some way focused on sustainability,
right.
are touching upon some aspect of sustainability, and that's how we came up with the top 100 list. And that got released today. So
Oh,
it's
wow.
an important question that you asked, Thakur.
Beautiful. Fantastic. Make sure you give me the link for that, because we'll include it in the description below. So if viewers are interested, they can click and get more information about that. But that's such a fantastic initiative. As soon as you put the words Hall of Fame, everybody jumps at that opportunity. I think one other thing I just want to, I'm more curious than anything else, but you also mentioned that, if there is the skill gap,
Yes.
you'll have resources to sort of help applicants fill that. Tell me a little bit more about how you sort of envision that coming to fruition.
Yeah. So it's basically the phase 2 of the boardiQ on the platform will have a board readiness path, which is basically going to be a very immersive, learning experience, which again plants a knowledge graph of what you have, and versus a particular board vacancy, and recommends a learning path. In the interim, while the platform is getting built, we have a very simple tool set which we've created, which can be used manually while the platform gets built. So it's called the board profile generator, which really helps you understand. So it's a 3-step process. The first step would help you understand your own personal values. And I give the Airbnb example where Brian Chesky, when he had to, during the pandemic, he had to kind of change his vision for the company. And they went public last year, and which was hugely successful.
Yeah.
But he had to take a lot of painful decisions because of the whole leisure industry being impacted. So the first thing he did was to do what's called an inside-out approach, where he tried to understand each individual's core values and tied it to the new business mission. So not to reinvent the wheel, but the boardIQ board profile generator, step 1 is to understand your personal value and understand what your organization's core values are and see how they mesh, because that will give you an idea as to whether you need to stay there or you need to kind of pursue other opportunities. The second step in the board process is to really be able to talk about your elevator pitch. So again, it gives a very solid example. It's a very simple tool. It's got some 6 steps involved where it takes you through a journey of understanding each aspect of your strength and really kind of stitching a story in terms of generating an elevator pitch. And then the third aspect is, board skills, and it's not rocket science. There's only about 11 or 12 skills that each board really requires for board members to succeed. So again, contextualizing, your own ability to assess. And then it kind of brings out a board profile for you at the end of the whole exercise. So this is a manual toolkit right now, but the platform is what's going to kind of be the showstopper in terms of putting all the tech behind it and bringing it out as a part of the value.
Absolutely. And again, this is the importance of having one cohesive platform, right? Instead of resources that are manual and that are hard to access. If we can combine everything into one, under one umbrella, I think that would be hugely beneficial. Fantastic. So from coming back to the business, what is the grand vision? Where do you hope to be in, let's say, 3, 5, 10 years? What do you hope to achieve?
Yeah, so even if you look at some of the numbers that are staring at us, even as we launched the boardIQ, so if you look at African American representation, CEO representation on Fortune 1000 boards, it's at 1%. And 2 of the boardIQ Hall of Famers, Roz Brewer and Thasunda Brown Duckett, earlier this year, I'm very proud to say that they were in my boardIQ Hall of Fame. So both of them became CEOs. We have only 2 women CEOs that are African American in Fortune 500 companies. And if you look at LGBTQ plus representation, there's only 0.1% representation on boards. And if you look at Latinx, whether it's Latinos or Latinas, it's only at 2.2%. And if you look at Asian Americans, the big tech, if you look at, and this is not Smita saying, it's Harvard research, which really talks about the bamboo ceiling. So for every, if you look at promotability to executive and board roles, especially in Silicon Valley, it's 1:80 for white Caucasians. And for Asian Americans, it's 1:280.
Wow.
So, and that's how the term came about in terms of bamboo ceiling. So you have enough data to say that there are some element of bias, whether it's not having pipeline or, whether it's inherent metrics that are being measured on. And so even if the boardIQ were to move the needle, even by 1% in any of these metrics, I would say it would create a social impact in terms of getting any of these underrepresented minorities, in terms of getting gender, in terms of getting African Americans, Latinx, Asian Americans, LGBTQ plus. Even if we were to move the needle by a slight percentage, I think we would have really done something to, something to have a social impact on. Business metrics, yes, the monetization is a big element of our business model, but it's not the first and foremost goal for us. But it does happen to have a very healthy monetization model, I would say, because even if we were to save current board hiring, if you remember, one of our biggest disruptions is to really halve the board hiring costs. So board hires typically take anywhere between $75,000 to $150,000 to hire.
Mm-hmm.
And with our subscription-based model, it would be less than half of that. And even then, the number of board vacancies in California and in the US and in phase 3 when we take it global, because again, inclusion on boards is just not a US aspect, because every nation is talking about it. There are some progressive nations like the Nordic countries, which is Norway, Sweden, where you have women running the nations, where they've put the agenda of inclusion higher than oil. Those countries are doing really well in terms of representation on boards. But long story short, if we were to really go into a global mode, there would be at least around 640 odd thousand board vacancies that we would be talking about. And if you just do the modeling in terms of monetization of assuming that all of those 640,000 boards will hire just one board member,
Right.
that's market opportunity that we're talking about.
That's huge. Yeah.
It's huge. And then even if you were to tap like 5% or 10% of that market share, it's immense. And then you have the pay-per-click model, which is advertising revenue. You have the board readiness path, which is again, it is owned by the candidate in terms of affordability, because you want basic onboarding onto the platform is free. But if you were to use the value-added features, one would need to pay for it. But it's going to be less of a cost because we want more of a social impact in that sense. Right. And of course, you have the Hall of Fame, which is immense potential, because right now it's not monetized. But think about Forbes 30 under 30, Fortune 40 under 40, or any of those dimensions, and really kind of creating a very compelling. None of them have inclusion as a focus, whereas the boardiQ's key differentiator is it has inclusion as its focus. And so really creating a property which can be monetized on these aspects is a huge, huge opportunity by itself. And including an annual flagship gala, which has the award ceremony and all of that. So if you look at our business model, it really touches upon all of these 4 revenue streams. Yeah.
Fantastic. This has been such a fantastic learning experience, and I really, applaud you in what you're trying to achieve with boardiQ. I really love the business model and the concept of inclusion. Now, we've touched on a lot of things in the last, so much 20 minutes or 25 minutes. But is there anything I've left out that I should have asked you that you think is important to sort of understand the whole story?
Not really. It's just that I think we as women entrepreneurs struggle to get funding. So I think that's the stage I'm struggling with personally. And so that's the only thing that's left out is because getting even a CTO in the Valley is such an expensive proposition, and to get the tech behind it is also such an expensive proposition. So having the ability to really hedge your bets and support this cause, because I know there are a lot of funds that are focused on women entrepreneurs, but I've drawn a blank personally myself, but I'm still very resilient because I know the vision is very clear, the timing is right, the blueprint is ready. It's just that I need a believer, whoever that is, to really kind of look at the end results and the value proposition and the social impact. And invest in the boardiQ. So that
absolutely
the only absolutely
absolutely. And we hope at Startup Steroid we can help you get those resources. And for anyone who's watching, log into Startup Steroid. You'll be able to see the pitch deck that's Smitashree has uploaded. You'll be able to access her contact information and speak to her directly, email her. We'll have all of that information in one place. So hopefully we can get you the resources you need to sort of launch yourself to the next level. But once again, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate the time. I really appreciated learning more about you and the company you're building. And I wish you all the luck in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really applaud you for doing what you are and giving me so much of your time. So I really applaud you for that.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Okay.
Bye-bye.